Welcome to Chasing the Truth. This is Sean Graham, your host. I'm chasing the truth from the normal to the paranormal. Tonight's guest is a special friend of mine. He's a Christian, and as soon as he opens his mouth and passes wind through his vocal cords, you'll know exactly who he is. My guest is Dark Waters himself, the king of horror narration. He came out in 2015 and has not looked back in the paranormal community since. He's stirred a lot of people's thoughts, scared a bunch of people. If you have not visited his website, iamdarkwaters.com, that has a boatload of horror narration from the paranormal, anything from dogman, black-eyed children, ghosts, Bigfoot, werewolves, skinwalkers, you name it. He's got a story to match it. So welcome, Dark Waters, my friend.
What's going on, Sean? How are you?
I'm doing well, man. Doing well. What's going on? You contacted me and said, hey, I want to do a tell-all interview with you. So,
well, you know, if I'm going to tell all, I'm going to tell all to somebody that's in the Dark Waters family. So I figured, hey, it'll be a good time for us to get some information out there. First of all, congratulations on the show. And for those people listening who don't know, you rank between number 1 and number 5. No, probably number 1 and number 3 every time you air on Paranormal Radio app, which is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. Competing against the best of the best. So congratulations on the success. I'm proud of you.
Thank you, sir.
And happy to have you as a member of the family, man. I think we're going to do a lot together.
All right. So, biggest thing in the last little bit that has hit the news, everybody that is in the paranormal radio entertainment industry and the people that actually listen, is Art Bell's death. You know,
right.
How'd that affect you?
Well, it was, for me, it was a very sad thing because Art Bell is pretty much the quintessential essence of what we do. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things where, although I didn't know him and I didn't have an opportunity to get to know him, I still walk in his footsteps. And I really honestly say I do, because what Art did was he was a person that was a collector of stories as well. Not only did he collect the stories and encounters of people, but he had his radio show and he aired those stories and encounters. And then he was just, he just took a beachhead for the paranormal industry. So when you turn and you see a Dave Schrader or a George Norrie or a Heather Wade or any other major big name person, everyone's walking in his footsteps and in his shadow. And even though he's dead and gone, I think his contribution will always live on. I mean, in fact, if you look at Paranormal Talk Live, the app, 90% of the stuff that's streaming is Art's work. You know, when you look at the top 10, it's like 4 or 5 shows that's just old Art Bell shows that are streaming just on different stations, which is crazy. You know, it's his old work. So that just goes to show you how significant he was to the industry. And I just hope that I can use a little bit of that magic and build my own little platform and my own little niche where people will remember me that way one day.
Oh yeah, you've got the chops and the vocal cords that, you know, most of the people I know that will listen to paranormal radio already know you. Period. End of story. If you don't know them, you will know them. So what got you into starting out in YouTube back in 2015? What happened to spur you to do this kind of stuff?
This is tell-all, right? So let's tell all. So it was a number of things. Number one, I've always been a storyteller, and I learned how to tell stories from my mentor, a guy named Joe Baker, who taught me from an entrepreneurial standpoint that it's always better to disagree with someone in the story format, as opposed to just saying no or yes or I don't like your idea. He would always tell me, he would say, James, you know, instead of just telling a person straight out, although there's times when you should tell a person straight up, hey, man, that's BS. Other times it's better just to tell them a story so they won't get offended, but they'll get the point. So I sat with him for years and listened to him do it and started practicing that on my own, which morphed into me hanging out with friends, drinking, smoking cigars, and then learning how to captivate a small audience of people. Um, because in the business realm, there's a lot of mingling. And those people who don't know my background is electrical engineering, insurance, real estate investing, mortgages, and hard money. So there's times when I'm sitting at a table with 10, 15 people, not necessarily a table, but in a lounge with 10, 15 people, and there's only so much business you can talk about. And people do business with people who like that they like, right? Or people who they feel are like them. And so you have to learn how to win people over. And one of the ways to win people over is just sharing stories about your life. And I just so happen to have a rich, fulfilling, full life with a whole bunch of stuff going on. So that's where the skills came from. The decision to use the skill set was two things, partly ego and partly necessity. Um, let's talk about the ego part first. I'm listening to YouTube horror narrators, sitting on a porch smoking cigars, and I'm like, these guys suck at telling stories. And I don't mean it in an offensive way, but I just mean, but they suck. Like it was that British monotone accent or the I'm trying to be creepy and scary tonality that they use. And I was like, that just doesn't work. That's not how you tell a story. So I said, well, I can tell a story. I could definitely tell a story better than these guys. So then I had to go through the process of figuring out how to use YouTube and all the rest of that. Then at the same time, it was a perfect storm because I had went through a divorce and I needed another stream of income. And so I said, hey, these guys are making money on YouTube. I could make $1,000 a month on YouTube. But then it blew up and went way further than I ever anticipated it doing when I went on Coast to Coast with Dave Schrader. And then it was just all uphill from there. People say downhill, but it was all uphill from there. And that's how we got to this point where there's imdogwaters.com with multiple radio shows and stories and albums and everything else.
Wow. So, what was the first paranormal story that you came across? I know you keep giving your number out to the public to call you with these fantastic stories they have with their encounters or their life. So, what was the first fantastic story that you actually really believed, but scared the shit out of you?
The first story that came to me that I really, really believed, and it didn't come via the phone, it actually came from hanging out at a cigar store called Cigar Factory New Orleans, was the dogman encounter in New Orleans East in Bayou Sauvage. That was a guy who was, I think he was a ranger, Army ranger, and he was going fishing early in the morning, and he goes out on this levee. And the circumstances around him going out fishing that day was that he was supposed to be doing something with his dad. He had a whole bunch of stress going on, and he just wanted to get away and get some time to himself. So he goes out to Bayou Sauvage all the way down the levee, and he's out there fishing. And the way the area is set up, and you can literally Google this, Bayou Sauvage by Little Woods neighborhood in New Orleans East, and you can look at the aerial map of it. You'll see where the levee kind of curves around that bayou, but then you also see where the levee goes and runs along Lake Pontchartrain. And at the base of the levee, you'll see some train tracks. And on the other side of that same levee is the bayou, which is pretty much a swamp. That's why they call it bayou, but it's a swamp. And he's out there fishing in Lake Pontchartrain, down the levee on the opposite side of the train tracks, and the train starts to come. And so homeboy's like, all right, I'm going to go back. I don't want to get caught between the lake and the train tracks, so the space is extremely small. He needed to cross the tracks and go back up the levee. He crosses the tracks, goes back up the levee, and he's up there smoking. And then he looks and he sees something swimming in the bayou. And at first, it's swimming on a diagonal away from him, but then it looks and sees him and starts swimming towards him. And you know how you're standing there looking at something? And just to give you the circumstances of him telling me the story the first time, we're literally in a cigar shop. He's sitting in this beautiful leather chair. His arms are rested on the chair. I'm sitting in a chair across from him. And his eyes are glassed over and glossed over. You can see that he's reliving what he's telling me. And prior to that, him telling me the story, I was telling somebody else about Dogman. And he just so happened to say, hey, man, I've seen that thing before. And I was like, well, I'll buy you a cigar if if you tell me the story. So get him a cigar. So now he's sitting right in front of me, and I'm reading every body cue, all the body language, everything. This guy's a complete stranger. He ain't got no reason to lie to me. And back to the story, he's on top of the levee. He's looking and he sees this thing. It starts coming towards him, climbs out of the water, and then he realizes, man, this is. At first, he thought it was a bear, like a black bear. And he's like, man, we don't really have black bears down here. But when he gets out of the water, he realizes this is a monster. So the only thing he can think to do is run back down the levee and try and get across the tracks before the train comes and put the train between him and it. Because that's just like, man, I don't know what else. I can't, So he runs down the track, literally down the levee, jumps across the track. And a few seconds later, it wasn't like in a movies where you jump in the head of the train, you just miss it. But within 10 seconds, the train passes. And so he's got a few minutes to breathe and think. And the only thing he can think of is, I'm going to use this train to get back to my vehicle. So he's jogging alongside of the train in this little bitty space, man. When I say this space is small, it's probably about 10 to 12 feet, 14 feet wide at the max. But then there's these rocks that are from the lake on the side. So he's literally dodging these rocks as he's jogging, running alongside the train. And as the train cars pass, he realizes, man, I'm not going to be able to get as far away from this thing as I want to. And so he says, okay, I'm gonna calm down, I'm gonna catch my breath, and whatever's on the other side of this train, when I get back up, I'm just gonna have to deal with it. So the train passes, gets completely past him. He says, okay, I'm going up the levee. He goes back up the levee, and he looks, and he doesn't see anything. So he's like, oh, shit, okay. So he takes off running, hauling ass as fast as he can. And the distance from where he parked his car to where he was, it's probably about a mile and a half. It's not significantly long, but you got to remember, this is New Orleans, and he's running on top of a levee. And the levees are not like paved or concrete or anything. I mean, you're talking about running through potholes and all the rest of this. So he's running as fast as he can. When he gets to his car and finally gets the car open, gets in and gets ready to pull off, he realizes that this thing is not only there, but it's actually charging towards him. So
Damn.
Now, this is the crazy thing. You're on top of a levee. And I've told this story a number of times, but it's hard to make people understand this unless you see it. You have to see the levee. So you're 12 feet, maybe 14 feet in the air, because this is what protects us from storm surge. You're 12 to 14 feet in the air. The space is just narrow enough for your car to drive down. So it's not like you got room to turn around. You can't back up, spin a car around. And he drove into the space because he didn't expect himself to have to be fleeing out of there. So now he's got to reverse that vehicle back down the levee, looking over his shoulder and not topple over and get out of there. So he's flooring it, going backwards, going on top of the levee as fast as he can. Now, and he has to take his eyes off this thing. When he gets down towards the end, which you'll see, if you look on the map, you'll see it there's a little elevation where it goes down, and then it goes into a flat space. When he gets down and he was able to cut his wheel and turn back down the levee, and he's backing down, he hits the brakes and spins his vehicle, and to turn it around so he can go back out. So as he's spinning his vehicle, he sees the thing on all fours still running, and look at that big old spider. And as I'm sure there's a huge spider in my house, and he sees the thing on all fours still running. When he spins the vehicle, and he still has to put it in drive and pull out, and as he's pulling out, he's looking through his side mirror, and it's stopped, and it's just standing there. So he heads down Haynes Boulevard and gets the hell out of there. Now, I talked to him probably about 15 times about that story. Nothing ever changed in the story. Only thing he kept doing was the details became more and more vivid. Like when he first told me the story, he was like, man, it was black. And, he said the way it looked was when the sunlight hit it, the sun looked like it absorbed it into the black fur. He was like, that's how dark it was. Just dark, dark, dark black. And he kept on just little minor details more and more that he would remember, but it never shifted. It never was, I drove the car out head first. He always had to back the vehicle out. It never was anything like any added exaggerations. And typically what happens when people are lying to me in the story is the story changes a lot. You know, like just like there's stuff that's missing from that story I know because I haven't told it in 3 years, and there's stuff that I don't remember that he told me. But the story, in essence, is still the exact same story. Um, but when you're dealing with some people, they'll tell you a story and it changes like by 90 degree angle. It's like, wait, that's not what you told me last week. You know, so that was the first very, very great, good story that I was told, and I think it was one of the first ones I shared. Then I started getting stories from people that were a little bit, and I stopped doing those that were a little bit too, they were a little bit too much for people on YouTube. I had one story from a young lady who was kidnapped, and she was raped, and she was able to get away because she pretty much killed the guy who kidnapped and raped her. I've had stories from people who were in serious gang fights in Chicago, where a lot of people were murdered and killed, and then weeks later they started seeing shadows in the neighborhood. So some of the stuff I've never even told because it just wasn't, I just figured like people on YouTube really can't handle it. I gave them a sample of some things and it was like, oh, I can't believe you told that story. And I'm like, nah, the person wanted me to share the story so you can learn the lesson of how not to get raped. You know what I'm saying? They wanted me to tell you the story. But, and so some of the stuff I've just never told. Overall, I'll say that I probably got about 25% of the content that I've never even spoken of. Maybe 30% I've never spoken of.
Wow. Okay. So you're touching base with all these people that has all these paranormal, demonic, you name it, experiences. Have you ever had any kind of hauntings, demons, or anything plague you while you were doing this? Now, I can personally vouch for some stories that's happened to me. So have you ever heard anything like that or experienced anything?
Oh, I constantly have stuff going on.
Wow.
We can start at the beginning.
Sure.
Like when I first started doing this and sharing the stories, little things would happen and I didn't understand why it was happening. It was like cold spots. It started off with simple stuff like cold spots in the house, which didn't make sense. Like, why is it cold over here, but it's 92 degrees outside? It shouldn't be cold and I don't have the air conditioner running. Like crazy stuff, right? And then it escalated and it started to, a lot of it hinged on the people that I was talking to. Depending on the individual I was dealing with, sometimes things were more amped up. And the very first one that I remember that was really, really, really bad, I mean, this one was terrible, was this gentleman who called me. And he was the reason why I stopped talking about demonic stuff. He was one of the reasons. He wasn't the sole reason, but him and this other lady, the other lady was the reason. But he was one of the reasons why I stopped talking about demonic stuff, because I'm sitting on the porch, smoking a cigar, talking with him. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning. And he's telling me about how his life has been plagued with all this demonic activity. And as he's talking about the things that were going on with him, like scratches and being wakened at night by being pulled out of bed, all this other crazy stuff, and smells of sulfur. I'm sitting on the porch in front of me, and before I'll take some pictures of this porch for people and put them out there. We'll do that for this interview. And if you're sitting on my porch and you're looking out, there's these distribution power lines that kind of dip down right in front. There's a palm tree to the right-hand side and all this other stuff. Well, in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock, maybe 1:30 in the morning, 2 crows fly up and land on the power line.
In the middle of the night?
In the middle of the night. And I'm like, okay, well, blackbirds don't fly at night. Number one, that's one thing we have a lot of in New Orleans. I ain't never seen them at night.
I've never heard of anything other than owls fly at night.
Nope, 2 crows. And they are literally looking at me. Like, it's like they're just sitting there looking at me. I'm like, okay, this don't make no sense. And he continues to talk, and now I'm outside. And I never experienced anything like this ever again, where the air outside changed. You know how you can feel like the sense in the air in a room changes? Mm-hmm. Like I'm outside, open air on a porch, and the air outside starts to change. Like, it's crazy. And then I'm looking, and my eyes are just kind of, as I'm listening, I'm panning my eyes back and forth. The smoke's rising out of my mouth. and I see across the street this huge black shadow. And at first, I'm thinking it was a person because it was coming around the side of a house. And I'm like, okay, that's a person. What the hell is he doing out here at 1 o'clock in the morning? But I'm in the hood. People walk around. I call them walkers. They walk to Walgreens. They walk to, and then there's restaurants down the street. So I'm like, they walking. I'm not bugging. Then it crosses the street and into the light. And as it's coming into the light, crossing the street, it's not a person. It's a shadow. It gets to the corner where my house is, and it disappears. And I'm like, holy crap. I know I just saw that. And that doesn't make sense. So I tell him, I say, listen, bro, and my exact words are, listen, bro, I'm not really comfortable holding this conversation with you. He was like, well, why? I said, because there's some weird stuff going on. They got two crows up here on this power line. I said, the big black shadow just crossed the street. I don't know what kind of shit you got with you, but I don't want nothing to do with it. And I was like, so I'm going to holler back at you later. I get off the phone with him. I block his number, right? Mm. And nothing happens inside of the house after that. Everything is cool. The worst one was this lady who had what we discovered, which was some very old world troll magic put on her. And
troll magic. What?
Yeah.
What's that?
It's just magic from Scotland. It's just old magic, super old magic. And her family was cursed. And I'm talking with her. And that culminated with me going to bed and something sticking its finger initially into my mouth. Yeah. And I bit down on the finger and I tasted it, and then into my nose about 15 minutes later. And I literally grabbed whatever it was. I grabbed the wrist of whatever it was. But this finger goes in through my nasal passage, down my throat, and I could feel it touching inside of my esophagus. After that, I started having that acid reflux that everybody's heard me talking about so much, to the point to where it was just ridiculous. That is when I realized how dangerous what I was doing really was. But it was the greatest blessing in the world because it was confirmation for me as a Christian that, okay, if all this stuff exists and it can try to affect you, that means it can be repelled, and all you need to do is seek God to repel it. So that all those instances sent me on my road and my studying, which led me to the point to where I'm in now, where I can honestly say, as from a spiritual perspective, like I trust God more now than I've ever in my life, because I've had to ask God to remove and destroy things that were coming after me. And I've watched it happen. I mean, like something comes in the house. Like I think I called and told you about I was doing my prayers of the Psalms in the Bible, and I was working on some things for my business. Yeah. And next thing you know, that night, this huge dark black shadow walks out of my son's room and into the living room. I'm laying across the bed.
Well, you didn't tell me that till you did. You told me, you said, I've got to go. Something's happening. Yeah. You ended it abruptly. Then you told me that the rest of the story you were just telling me. Go ahead.
Yeah, and so huge. I mean, bro, when I say huge, like these ceilings are probably 12 feet. Yeah, 12 feet in here. 8 feet would be there. So 12 feet ceilings in here. 12-foot ceilings, not feet. 12-foot ceilings are in here. And so, I mean, it's as tall as the ceiling is coming out of my kid's room going down the hallway. And I've felt like, fear. I've had night terrors where it feels like something in the middle of your sleep grabs your spine and pulls it and it snaps like a guitar string. It wasn't that. This was waves of energy, which translated into body fear coming at me like almost like if you can imagine yourself being neck deep in the ocean and the waves are coming to hit you. You know how there's that constant motion of water hitting you? Mm-hmm. Same thing, but there's no water. It's just this energy. It's like boom, 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 boom. And it started getting faster and faster and faster and faster. Then there was this whispering, and I've never heard anything like that. And it's like, and it's like it's saying words. And if you listen carefully enough, you can hear words, but it's multiple people whispering. And I was like, what the hell is this? And prior to me being in the position that I am now, and by being positioned, I mean spiritual understanding by position, that would have scared the hell out of me. Now that I understand what it is, I immediately hopped up. Walked in here, got my Bible, started reading Psalms. That didn't work. I said, okay, you pretty bad boy. You know what I'm saying? You somebody significant. Um, I open up my book of prayers. I do I do a prayer to Jesus Christ to ask him to send the Archangel Michael here to defeat it. And then the minute I do that, the fear starts to subside. And it's almost like I was telling you about being in the ocean with the water up to your neck. So imagine the water being drained down all the way down to your knees. So now the water's at your knees, but those waves are still hitting below your knees. And I'm like, okay, this is not cool. And so I said, well, and I'm literally standing in the middle of my living room with my Bible. And I said, well, you know what? I should have just did this to you in the first place. I said, this is me being stupid. I said, but I plead the blood of Jesus Christ over my house, my family, my bloodline, my children, my ex-wife, my fiance, and I just name everybody because it's a demonic attack. And you may get away from me, but you may go towards somebody else. And I said, in the name of Jesus Christ, I command that you leave this house. And then boom, it's gone. Like that fear wave is gone. And so I'm like, okay. I come back into my office, which is where I do my interviews, and I'm right at my little altar, and I'm continuing to pray, and I'm thanking God for doing this. And then something in my head says, take your holy water out and go around the house, go to the basement, to the furthest corner of the basement, and sprinkle holy water. And in my head, it says, don't be afraid. And this house is 3 levels. The basement level is pretty much there's a washing machine, a dryer down there, a pool table. But there's this little room in the basement, the very far back corner of the basement that has no light, no nothing. And I don't even keep light bulbs down in the basement. I got like 1 or 2. It needs like 12. I keep 2 of them, right, with light bulbs in it. Yeah. Go down there and it's ice cold. And I'm like, oh, this is where you went. So I go through, got my Bible, I'm reading Psalms 23, and I'm sprinkling the whole house with holy water. I go in that corner, and you can feel it in that corner. And I sprinkle the holy water, and I come back upstairs, and I lay in the bed. Now, although I was confident that God did what I asked him to do, part of me was still afraid. So I'm laying in the bed, and I'm like, man, God, I'm still scared. Now, I say it out loud. I said, God, I'm still afraid. And then a voice in my head says, fear not, you're protected, go to sleep. And we're talking about I was wired awake like I was drinking coffee, like I had 2 Trent to iced coffees from Starbucks, and then I just pass out. Boom, gone to sleep. Wake up the next morning, I walk around the house, don't feel anything. I'm like, okay, cool, we good, we're gone, right?
Right.
And that's one of the things that I don't think people understand about the people who are in the paranormal entertainment business. 2 things is paranormal, it's entertainment, or 3 things. It's paranormal, it's entertainment, and it's a business. It has an effect on you. And people who've been following me for a long time, they'll say stuff like, hey, Dark Waters, why do you take so long to put out content sometimes? I'm like, bro, like my spiritual well-being is more important than you being entertained, you know? Because people don't really understand that if you talk about demons all day long, then guess what's coming to pay you a visit? Demons.
Yeah.
If you talk about angels, guess who's coming to pay you a visit? Demons and angels. So I pace myself with a lot of these things because I now understand how it works. And so, for example, the last interview I did, which was Dave Scott, and the power went out because there was a vicious thunderstorm. Dave wanted to talk about demons. But before I did that interview, I prayed for 4 days straight to cover my household before I even started that conversation. And even though I did all that praying, a thunderstorm came out of nowhere. Bing, knocked the power out. Only in my square block did the power go out. Nowhere else but my square block. So my square block, the transformer blew. And I mean, we're in the middle of the interview. We go to a commercial break, and I'm like, bro, Dave, it's really, really bad outside. And he's like, man, how bad? So he actually comes back. He tells everybody, I don't know how this is going to go. I'm on the phone with Dark Waters, but he's saying that there's a really bad thunderstorm. And then we go to the next break, and boom, power gone. Like, only thing in this house that was lit up was the candle. So I was like, all right, I'm going to bed. I'm not bugging out. I'm not tripping. I'm going to bed. But I say all that to say, for those people who listen to this, there needs to be a certain.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to this best of sample of some of my 5 years in doing this radio show podcast called Chasing the Truth. Please visit iamdarkwaters.com, or you can email me at seang@iamdarkwaters.com. And my numbers and links are in the description below. God bless y'all, and I'll catch you on the flip side.